Hi, it's Gareth at SIOAOA, and today I'm asking, is change management dead? There isn't an IT department or provider out there that doesn't have to make changes to their IT services, but more and more there seems to be a growing frustration with how changes are governed and managed. With the increase in use of cloud services, automation, orchestration, Agile and DevOps methodologies, I've certainly heard views that the old ITIL way of doing things is outdated or something that will soon be consigned to the history books. So today we're going to explore some of those views and ask the question, well, is change management dead? So, how has this perception come about? I think this has a lot to do with how IT departments, providers have decided to implement their change management processes that 5 or 10 years ago was maybe appropriate, but then they haven't evolved as industry trends have. So a lot of the frustration I've seen in the past is centered around speed. Change management is too slow. The speed in which IT services are delivered nowadays is increasingly rapid, to the point where expectations about demand and delivery is that these things need to happen and that needs to be almost instantaneous. For example, 10 years ago, if there was a need for maybe a new server, this would have to have been scoped, sourced, delivered, installed, configured and implemented, all of which, particularly when thinking about physical elements, would have taken time. Now, in a cloud environment, all of those things can take place with a few clicks of the mouse. So where in days gone by, change management could afford to be perhaps a little bit leisurely, nowadays this just causes frustration. Lots of IT functions have in place measures like 7 days for a change to be submitted, reviewed, approved and scheduled before it even gets to the cab. And that cab may only convene on like a weekly basis, meaning that those who want to make necessary changes have a long lead time to even get their item on the agenda, and then they have a very tight window to line up all of the ducks. Well then, of course, and you'll have seen this too, CAB becomes a technical talking shop, meaning the specifics of the change are debated on technical or design principles, which can result in the change requester being rejected and having to go all the way back to the start of the process. Well, naturally this leads to the assessment that change management is hard to navigate and, importantly, too slow, too obstructive to me getting done what needs to be done. Lots of change functions also have elements of request fulfillment or demand management. It's almost innately baked into their processes too. What do I mean by that? Well, someone submits a request that is going to require a change, and the process of scoping what's needed, resourcing the effort, getting that approved is all baked into the change process. Again, for example, if a change is raised, it needs those 4 or 5 whatever days to allow all of those things to happen before it even gets to cab. Then there's the one-size-fits-all approach. Now, not all changes are equal. There are many factors that make up a change: the risk to the service, the impact of the change, what service the change is impacting, how big of an effort that is, how difficult is it to roll those changes back. Yet lots of IT teams apply the same process to a minor low-risk, low-impact change as they do to those high-risk, high-impact, difficult changes. And often the approach taken is to favour those high impact, high risk changes, a very conservative, safety first approach to everything. Yes, of course, changes that carry a high element of risk or impact need to be very carefully considered for obvious reasons, but taking the same approach to those low risk, low impact changes can add a lot of, unnecessary fat into the governance of changes taking place. So what does this all lead to? Well, firstly, as we've mentioned, the change management process is going to be slow for those people that want or need to navigate it. If the process is slow, then it's going to slow down your ability to deliver beneficial changes to your customers, users and stakeholders. And this could lead to you not being able to meet their aspirations and expectations. What this is also going to lead to is probably a backlog of change that you and your teams need to get done, but the constraints of the change process is going to limit that. That in itself can lead to large, heavyweight, multifaceted changes then being submitted that carry more risk, more impact, and an increased likelihood of failure. Secondly, if you're treating all changes the same, I think this can actually increase the risk of change failure. Of course, you want to spend more time, more focus, more effort on those high risk, high impact changes. However, if you're giving low risk, low impact changes the same effort, This could negate your ability to allocate finite resources, time and effort in ensuring those big ticket items have the attention that they need. And if they don't, well, this increases the chances that that change could encounter issues. So a slow change process is likely to include lots of big, bulky, high risk, high impact changes that are prone to failure. Or worse, it's going to encourage unauthorised changes. Come on, let's be realistic. There is not an IT department in the world that hasn't seen at some point an unauthorised change. I'm not supporting that this is right or appropriate, of course not, but it does happen. Somebody needing to make a change fairly quickly for something that is low risk, low impact in their eyes, being faced with a very long, heavyweight, cumbersome change process that they know is going to add time, effort and delay to their activity. Now, often unauthorised changes only come to the surface when they themselves have caused an issue or an outage, but in reality they probably happen, well, a lot more than we'd like to believe. Now, I've heard people say, well, no harm done if it's not caused an outage, what's the issue? But the purpose of change management isn't simply to ensure that changes don't cause outages. And where they do, well, this can be embarrassing at best, but also pour significant amounts of doubt onto your ability as an IT department or functional provider to manage and govern changes to your customer's IT estate. Yes, we have a change management process. Yes, we govern our changes. But if that governance is bypassed because it's too cumbersome, too slow, too heavyweight, then you have to question, is that fit for purpose? In this regard, if this sounds like your change management process, well, it might not be dead, but you may need to be reading it its last rites. Okay, well, let's start by going back to that definition. Enabling beneficial changes to be made with minimum disruption to IT services. So no matter how IT services are delivered, whatever industry trends come and go, if we reflect on that definition statement, it's a positive thing. Enabling, beneficial change, limiting disruption. Anybody would say, yes, they are good things to have. I think the perception of change management is sometimes limited to, it's that process that we have to get approval from before we do anything. But often we don't reflect on why we have that in the first place. So let's look at some of those real reasons about why every single IT department has and needs IT change management. Firstly, communication. It's imperative that change activity is communicated to those people that are going to be or could be impacted by what the change is going to entail. And that includes users, customers, but also other people within the IT environment. Firstly, if your change is going to result in a level of service disruption or maybe change of functionality, you are, of course, going to want to make sure the user base is aware of this. Otherwise, you're simply inviting calls into the service desk unnecessarily and, more importantly, causing dissatisfaction with your user base. Secondly, internally, other people within IT need to know what's happening when, why. Well, their activity too might be impacted by what the change is scheduled to take place. And that leads me on to the second reason for change management, and that's conflict management. I've said it before. Good change management is like the air traffic control tower at the airport, making sure activity is coordinated and planned so that you don't end up with two planes trying to land on the same runway at the same time, which obviously wouldn't be good. In IT terms, you wouldn't want two separate changes taking place at the same time that could impact one another. For example, a change scheduled to push out a new application to all users at a certain time, when the network being used to push that app is being taken down for planned maintenance. That's simply going to lead to avoidable change failure. Thirdly, an accessible record of what has changed and when, and ensuring that your CMDB is updated to accurately reflect the state of the service at any point in time. Maybe a fairly loose analogy, but I think of this like when you come to sell a car and the dealer asks whether the car has a full service history. Now, if you were to tell the dealer, yes, you've made sure the car has been serviced, but there is no evidence of that, they're likely to offer you a lower price than if you did or you were able to evidence that. Why? Well, how do they know that you're telling the truth first and foremost? There may be all sorts of things wrong under the bonnet because you've told a porky pie that they then have to spend time and money fixing. The service history is that audit trail that the car has been well maintained, what was done when to ensure that the car is still in full working order, or highlights things that may need to be done next service around. And also linked to communication, having that record of what has changed is really important to those working within event, incident and problem management. We've all been involved in major incidents when a change is brought into question. And on the face of it, whilst the change shouldn't be a factor, we roll it back and find that service is magically restored. If change management isn't ensuring that there is a clear record of what is happening when, it's going to be mighty difficult for those managing incidents to be able to get to the cause of that issue and restore service for users. And finally, management of risk. Simply by validating that changes are fit for purpose, are the right things to do at the right times, allows those changes to proceed with minimum disruption to IT services. Imagine an IT function without change management. You know, you'd have lots of people doing lots of different things, bouncing into one another, unbeknown to those various service owners, causing changes to fail, resulting in service disruption for users on a very frequent basis. Now, when we put it like that, there's a very apparent need for change management. Of course, people don't want to make services go offline, but that would be the result if we didn't have change management. The challenge comes in ensuring your change management can enable all of these things whilst not becoming obstructive to the point that people start bypassing it or it delays you in meeting your customers' needs. Okay. So now how to breathe some life into your change process. Let's start with what I was saying about not all changes being equal. Lots of organisations, I believe, don't make sufficient use of standard changes. Now, I talked in more detail about standard changes in my Everything Changes video a couple of months ago, but good adoption of standard change models can mean low risk, repeatable, pre-approved changes can take place without the need to navigate what is often a more involved normal change process. Firstly, this can mean you can do simple things a lot quicker, but it also means you're not clogging up your normal change process with things that, well, frankly, don't need that level of attention. Standard changes should and still do ensure those reasons for having change management are still adhered to. They still form part of the forward schedule of change, so people know what is happening when. They're still recorded as happening or have taken place. And the standard change model they're reviewed to ensure that defined activity is taking place at a time that is agreeable to all. So standard change is definitely something to adopt more and more, in my opinion. Okay, what about normal changes then? So now, as we've talked about, change management is about ensuring communication and conflict management happens, activity is recorded and risk managed. Take a look at your change process and question, do the steps in your process align to these objectives? If you have a 5 days to cab rule, question yourself, why is that? Is that allow you to manage and coordinate resources to align to the change? Is that for you to determine whether this is the right thing to do technically? If so, then these are more aligned to service design and demand management than they are to change management. As we've discussed, change management is there to sign off on the fact that the change, as written, can take place as expected without bumping into anything else, and that we've got a record that that's taken place. These discussions and debates, in my opinion, should happen outside of the actual change management process, which is to validate the RFC record. Also, it's not uncommon for organisations to hold a cab on a weekly basis. If you're the same, well, how is that working out for you in your ability to deliver things quickly? Now, one company I work with had approximately 50 to 60 changes per week, and they held one cab per week. And all changes, irrespective of scale, impact, risk, had to go to cab for review. Now, as cab was only once a week for about an hour, that led to many changes being glossed over given the volumes, and only those significant changes being focused on. Any technical debate that arose at cab only made the situation worse. That meant whilst on paper they had strong change management governance, well, in reality, many of their changes were very large changes with high risk or impact and were prone to high failure rates. They quickly found more and more unauthorised changes coming out of the woodwork, an increase in emergency changes being used to get things pushed through as a priority, and an IT estate that was outdated, unmaintained because the strong change management process was inhibiting things happening when it needed to. What they did was a couple of fairly simple, fairly neat things. Firstly, they determined only changes of a high risk and high impact found their way to the CAB for review. They invested significant time and effort in converting low risk, low impact changes to standards to free up time in the normal change process. They then decided to hold daily change advisory boards with a 1-day turnaround time. Sounds pretty extreme, but what this resulted in was this. Well-formed changes being submitted that had all of the technical debate prior to entering the change process itself done and dusted. Those changes, given it was only a day turnaround, tended to be very small, well-contained changes rather than big, all-encompassing, cumbersome ones. After all, this first step of a change program, if that went well, the requester's only going to have to wait a day before able to go ahead with the next part, repeating that process day in, day out, rather than week on week. Therefore, these changes were much less risky, less impactful, crucially more successful, and allowed the IT team to work at real pace. The change process didn't just accept changes that were scheduled for the next 24 hours though. If, for example, a change initiator knew that a change they were making would likely result in some planned downtime and therefore they needed to give some advance notice, they could still submit this. However, it wouldn't find its way to the CAB until the day before implementation. So all that communication and liaison with the business could still take place before the actual CAB. As it was in the system, this allowed change management and other functions to have foresight that this activity was planned and would still allow for conflict of other changes to take place around it. Overall, readjusting the way they process change meant they were still able to ensure change management added real value to the management and governance of IT services, whilst increasing their ability to deliver beneficial changes with the minimum amount of disruption, in line with emerging and more modern ways of delivering IT service. So, let's go back to that original question. Is change management dead? Absolutely not. I think the need for well-coordinated change management is just as important as it was and as it's always been. However, your approach to how you implement this as a governance mechanism may well be on its last legs. We know more than most in IT that nothing stands still, and most IT departments and professionals are advocates of change. From a technical standpoint, we embrace new technologies and the benefits they bring, and well, the way we deliver those should be no exception. I've been Gareth at SIOAOA. Thanks for stopping by.